I'm in my home office, surrounded by the artifacts of my father's life. I'm sitting at the wooden desk that he made for me decades ago, solid wood and still bearing the marks of his enormous hands. Here's his 1939 school diary. The page is so yellowed and brittle, I'm afraid too much handling will crumble it to pieces. There's a framed certificate from 1975 certifying him as a member of the Million Mile Club. And then there's a composition book from 1941, filled with his perfect cursive handwriting. I used the two small upholstered toddler chairs that he made as step stools to reach the high cupboards and shelves in my apartment. This is season 2 of The Silence Between Hello. And this time, I'm not just processing grief through saved voicemails. I'm conducting an archaeological dig. Before I tell you about Dad, I need to tell you about Season 1. 7 weeks before Dad died, Mom passed away suddenly. In the chaos of grief, I discovered something unexpected on my phone, 30 minutes of saved voicemails from her. These Monday and Thursday check-ins were one-way conversations. Her voice was reaching across the distance and difference to simply say, I see you. I love you. Season 1 of The Silence Between Hello was my excavation of those voicemails, an exploration of my relationship with Mom and my journey out of a fundamentalist religion. I thought I'd been raised with conditional love, love that depended on believing the right things, behaving the right way, and staying within acceptable boundaries. But those voicemails revealed something different. Over years of Monday and Thursday phone calls, across theological disagreements and geographic distance, Mom had reached out again and again with affirming love. The communication between us, those conversations, those one-way voicemail treasures, remained long after she was gone. What I discovered was that the conditional love that I thought I'd been raised with wasn't so conditional after all. Mom had seen me, like really seen me, even when I became someone she'd never expected me to become.
Oh, hi, Jenny. This is Mom. Dad said that you had called, so I just got home from Eva's, so I thought I'd call you. Okay, bye.
But Mom's death left me with an unexpected realization about Dad. I had no saved voicemails from him, not even one. Our relationship had been mediated through Mom for so long that outside of my visiting home, I'd never developed direct communication with him. That's when the revelation came. Several months before Dad died, I was clipping his fingernails in their assisted living apartment. He was deep in the throes of dementia and on hospice. Every time the clicker clicked, he flinched as though I was going to hurt him. I'm not even sure he knew who I was. But as I held his veiny hands, those same hands I'd examined as a child in church, with their cracked nails and sun-damaged skin, I realized something devastating. This was the first time I had ever done anything for him. It made me profoundly sad, not just because of his condition, but because of what it revealed about our relationship. I had known my mother intimately, her fears, her dreams, her complicated inner life. But Dad had always been more of an enigma. He was the foundation Mom stood on, so steady and grounded that he almost became unseen. We loved each other, certainly, but it was as if we had Mom in common, and that's what connected us. Now, 2.5 years after his death, I'm trying to excavate the man I realize I never fully knew. Not Roy the gentle father. Not Roy the reliable husband. Not Roy the foundation for everyone else's life, but Roy the person. Who was he when no one was watching? What did he think about during those long hours in his truck, those quiet evenings in his woodworking shop? I have clues, fragments, evidence scattered across nearly 9 decades of life. So let me show you what I'm working with. First, there's the diary from 1939, when Dad was 12 years old. The cover reads, My School Day Autobiography, and inside, classmates have left messages like a friendship book. Dear Roy, when you are grown up, you may have a trophy cup, but will you remember me when you are grown up? Writes his brother Walter. The higher the mountain, the cooler the breeze. The higher the dress, the cooler the knees. Writes a bold 5th grader named Grace Marie, complete with hearts and arrows. Then there's his composition book from 1941 to 1942. It's filled with careful notes about American history, hand-drawn maps showing when each territory became a state. This is evidence of a hungry mind for learning, even after he had to leave school after 8th grade because his family couldn't afford bus fare. Then there's this Million Mile Club certificate from 1975. This is recognition for driving 1 million miles or 25,000 hours without a preventable accident. 25,000 hours of perfect driving? That's 12 and a half years of full-time work behind the wheel, navigating every road in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. And then I have the desk where I'm recording this podcast. Solid wood joints, still tight after decades of use. Then there's this mirror that he crafted, reflecting my face as I examine these artifacts. I even have tools from his woodworking shop. Then there's these family photos where he's usually in the background, a steady presence but rarely the focus. And then, of course, I have memories, fragments that I'm now examining with new eyes. Dad teaching me to read maps during cross-country road trips. His impish smile when he'd soak my sister and me with the garden hose while we were sunbathing on the roof. The way he'd flick Mom's ear when she was reading, or step on my toes when I was absorbed in a good book, or pinch my triceps when I least expected it. His physical, playful way of saying, "I see you." But perhaps most importantly, I have the context of who Dad was in his element. A farmer, born and raised on a farm in Wolf Lake, Minnesota, Dad understood the language of practical work. Even after he became a truck driver, we lived on what you'd call a hobby farm. We had chickens for eggs, and ducks and pigs for meat, and cows for milk, cats for mice, dogs for security. But not all at the same time. Dad was always working with his hands, always tending to something that needed care. This was where he seemed most himself, not in church where his cleft palate and speech difficulties made him a target for mockery, not in social situations where words were required, but on the farm where competence mattered more than eloquence, where useful work spoke louder than smooth speech. If these stories of excavating family artifacts and discovering who my parents really were resonate with you, I invite you to subscribe to my Substack newsletter, Things I Meant to Tell You. It's where I share stories from the other side of religious fundamentalism, complicated family dynamics, and everything I was once certain about. You'll find raw, relatable essays about faith deconstruction, family complexity, and midlife reinvention, stories about the artifacts our parents leave behind, the conversations we wish we'd had, and the courage it takes to rebuild your entire world. Plus reflections on the books, podcasts, and moments that help us make sense of it all. You can find it at Things I Meant to Tell You on Substack, or just search for my name, Jenny Skoog. Okay, so I'm beginning this excavation with a simple question. What can objects tell us about a person? Archaeologists reconstruct entire civilizations from pottery shards and tool fragments. What can I learn about Dad from his perfect handwriting, his woodworking precision, his choice to save hard candies in his car console, or his habit of humming Hank Williams songs, despite our household's prohibition on worldly music? Each artifact is a clue. Each memory is evidence. Each story passed down through family lore is a piece of the puzzle. Consider this entry from 1937, when Dad was 10 years old. Dear Roy, some boys go to London, some boys go to France, but Roy stays at home and gives the girls a chance. Writes classmate Verna May Ilitello. This wasn't a child struggling with social acceptance. This was a boy who, despite being born with a cleft palate that would mark him as different his entire life, had found his place in the social fabric of his rural community. What happened between this beloved child and the adult man who would be mocked by fellow churchgoers? When did he learn to step back from center stage? How did the boy who gives the girls a chance become the man who rarely spoke unless spoken to? Over the next 6 episodes, I'm going to dig through the layers of Dad's life like an archaeologist uncovering an ancient settlement. We'll start with the deepest layer, his childhood. preserved in that 1939 diary, and the traumatic story of his beloved Aunt Lydia's death by fire when he was just 7 years old. Then we'll work our way up through the sediment of rejection, his 4F classification during World War II that marked him as unfit for military service, his exclusion from church leadership roles, the repeated ways the world taught him that his voice didn't matter. Then we'll examine the marriage stratum, where he found partnership with Mom, but also perhaps another form of concealment. We'll study the evidence of his work life, that million-mile certificate, the furniture he crafted, the tools that became extension of his enormous hands. And finally, we'll look at the surface findings, the memories that I carry, the small rebellions that I witnessed, the moments when his true personality broke through the careful composure that he'd learned to maintain. Dad was born Roy Ernest Skoog on November 15, 1927 in Virginia, Minnesota. He died Roy Ernest Skoog on January 5, 2023 at age 95 in Albertville, Minnesota. But who was he in the 95 years between those 2 points? What dreams did he abandon? And what parts of himself did he learn to hide? What did it cost him to be known as the gentle man who never complained? I'm not looking to canonize him or condemn him. I'm trying to understand him, to see him as a complete person rather than just my father or Mom's husband or the family's foundation. Because here's what I've started to suspect. Dad's silence wasn't just his personality. His practical approach to love wasn't just his natural inclination. His tendency to fade into the background was not modesty. I think that Dad learned early and learned well that the world had no place for who he really was. So he created a version of himself that could survive. The reliable man, the steady presence, the foundation everyone else could stand on. But what happened to the Roy who existed underneath all of that usefulness? That's what I'm hoping to excavate. Not the myth of the perfect gentle father, but the actual human being who lived inside that carefully constructed identity. Next week, we dig deeper. We'll examine the oldest artifacts in my collection. That 1939 diary and the story of Aunt Lydia's tragic death when Dad was 7. We'll explore the deepest layer of the archaeological site, the boy Roy was before the world began teaching him to disappear. What I'm discovering is that Dad was loved first, before he was marked as different. He was celebrated before he was silenced. He was seen as special before he learned to step back. The evidence is all here, scattered across my desk, waiting to be assembled into a complete picture. I'm ready to begin the dig. This is Uncovering Dad, an excavation. I'm Jenny Skoog, and I'm about to discover who my father really was.